My name is Grace Ellington. I'm 67 years old. Today, I buried the man I lived with for 42 years, Henry. He was my silence in a noisy world, my support when I was unsteady, my morning coffee, my everything will be all right, even when I didn't believe it myself. The ceremony was at a funeral home in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. Everything was arranged as he wants, simple, without pomp. The coffin was plain cherry wood. The flowers, lilies, and irises. The pastor from the church we attended on Sundays spoke the right words. But they passed through me like a draft through an open door. I sat in the front row, wearing a black coat with a button I had sewn on the night before, just to distract myself from the thought, what comes next? Around me were family, friends, neighbors, people we had picnicked with, celebrated Thanksgiving with, shared salads at barbecues. But no one looked me in the eyes. Their gazes slid past, as if I wasn't a widow, not a woman who had lost her husband, but simply part of the scenery. And Doug. My only son, he stood in the corner holding close to his wife Amanda, wearing the suit we bought him back at his college graduation. His face was stone cold, no pain, no awkwardness. Just coldness. He didn't come to Minot before the service, not after. He just stood there. As if we were two people at the same funeral, but from different worlds. I remember holding his hand when he was scared to start first grade, tucking him in when Henry worked late, stroking his hair when he had a fever, and now he stood there with Amanda, looking at me like a stranger. When the service ended, the neighbor Bob Jennings came up to me and shook my hand silently. His wife, Sue, hugged me, and that was it. Others, who should have been familiar, just passed by, nodding as if I were a dry cleaner's receptionist, not a widow. Then, as we left the funeral home, Amanda shot me a look. Slick, quick, there was something unpleasant in it. You know that kind of look people give to old furniture they've forgotten to throw out. She held Doug's shoulder like she was guarding him. From me. And in that moment, I realized, with Henry gone, I had lost more than a husband. I had lost the bond. Without him, I was extra, even to my own son. In the limousine on the way to the memorial lunch, I looked out the window at the town I'd lived in most of my life, East Greenwich. Small, cozy, with streets where everyone knows everyone. Here, I taught history at the local school. Here, Henry and I bought our first home. Here, we celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary. And now, I was heading to a restaurant where everyone would eat sandwiches and drink coffee, discussing how delicious the almond cake was. And no one would say, "How are you, Grace?" As we drove, I looked at my hands. They trembled. I folded them in prayer and whispered to Henry in my mind, "Well, my dear, you're gone and I'm still here, but what for?" We had always been two against the world. Henry wasn't perfect, forgot anniversaries, never took out the trash, often grumbled in the mornings, but he knew how to hug me at the right moment. How to silently bring me a blanket when I sat on the porch. How to leave a note on the fridge. "Grace, you are my best decision." I felt that day something died inside me, not just a body. Something died in me. Something that connected me to this family, to this house, to this son. But deep inside, I felt. Not fear, not resentment, but a strange, heavy clarity. As if something was starting to wake up. As if Henry, even in leaving, had left me a key. I didn't yet know what it was for, but I knew I wouldn't stay silent for long. And that the day I opened my purse and take out that very envelope would come for sure. A week had passed since the funeral. The house still smelled of lilies, though the bouquets were beginning to wilt, like everything else around me. I was staying with Doug had offered, or rather, hadn't said no when I mentioned I'd stay a little while until I figured out what to do next. Our house with Henry stood empty and cold. I wasn't ready to return to the silence where every chair remembered his voice and every pillow his scent. Morning. I woke up before everyone else. An old Reflexo get up before dawn while the house was quiet. Henry loved to start his day with strong coffee and the sound of the news. I could still hear his voice reading headlines from the Providence Journal in my head. "Grace, did you see that mess in the Senate? Grace, you won't believe who they appointed." I brewed the coffee old-fashioned, just like he liked it. No capsules, no flavorings, just ground beans, boiling water, patience, and love. On the tray, 2 mugs, toast, and a small plate of strawberry jam. I knocked on the kitchen door leading to the living room. Amanda was already there, phone in hand, wearing a perfectly ironed shirt and a face as if she'd just been told a tax audit was coming for breakfast. I smiled. "Good morning, dear. I made some coffee." She didn't even look up, just said, "You don't have to bother." A pause. She looked at me. Her gaze held no tiredness, no bitterness, only icy clarity. "This is no longer your home." I didn't immediately understand what she said. My brain seemed to try to soften the meaning, replace the words, give them a different shade. But no, it sounded exactly as it was said. "Excuse me?" I breathed. She set her phone on the table, stood up, and came closer. "Now, you're nobody here, Grace." That was it. She didn't shout. She wasn't rude. She said it calmly, as if talking about the electricity bill. "Now you're nobody here." I stood there, holding the tray. The coffee was still hot, the toast was crisp, but I felt something freeze inside me, as if ice was sliding down my spine. I wanted to say something, any word. I wanted to remember how they taught me in college to conduct diplomatic conversations, how to be polite, how to smooth sharp edges. But I said nothing. I just smiled. A tight, soft smile that women of my generation wore as a shield. "Of course, dear, I understand perfectly." I turned slowly, put the tray back on the kitchen table, sat on a stool, took a sip of coffee. And in this silence, in the middle of a stranger's house that was once mine, I suddenly remembered the box. The very one where Henry kept family documents, his military medals, an old photo of us from graduation in Boston. And the envelope. The envelope he had placed there 2 months before he died. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention. He just said, "Grace, if one day you need assurance that you're not alone, take this envelope, but only if you truly need it." And I, as usual, joked, "What's inside? A confession of infidelity?" He smiled. "Something more important." And now, sitting in the house where my daughter-in-law says I'm nobody, I suddenly understood. It's time to open that envelope. But not yet. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me leave, of seeing me give up. I wanted that envelope to appear in a way that would make everyone forget who was once nobody. That same evening, after Amanda told me I was nobody here, I went upstairs to the guest room they now called mine. It looked like a roadside motel room. Neatly made bed, white walls, not a single photo. Even my slippers had been tucked under the bed as if to hint, "Don't get too comfortable." I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and took a deep breath. I didn't need a mirror to know how I looked. My cheeks were sunken, my eyes red, my shoulders slumped. I was a woman who had been told her place was outside the door. But you know what's strange? This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I felt something waking in my chest, where just recently there had been only grief. Not anger, not resentment, but clarity. Quiet, precise like a doctor before surgery, I knew the time had come. I took out a key, small, almost toy-like. It had hung on my key ring for 20 years. Henry had made it himself. He said I should keep it for everything just in case. Under the bed was an old box. Inside were albums, postcards, old scarves, things I held closer to my heart than many people. And beneath them, a wooden box. Heavy, cracked on one side, smelling of tobacco and soap Henry's scent. I sat down on the floor, slowly opened the lid. A creak. That very sound I'd heard dozens of times when he'd put something in there at night, unaware I was watching from the doorway. How carefully he placed papers inside, how he closed it with both hands as if before him lay a chest of gold, not yellowed documents. And there it was, the envelope. Beige, thick, with a handwritten inscription. Grace, only if truly needed. And a date, the 17th of October, 2017. I traced the letters with my finger. His handwriting steady, strong. Henry never printed letters, always cursive, as if everything he said was a promise. I remembered him once saying to me, If anyone ever tries to shut you out, this envelope will do its job. I had smiled then. You think our son and his wife will kick me out? He looked at me seriously. People change, Grace, sometimes not for the better. I want you to be protected, always. I opened the envelope, not fully, just peeked inside. There was a will, signed, sealed. I saw only the beginning. I, Henry William Ellington of sound mind and memory. That was enough. I didn't read further. Because that was enough. He had planned ahead. He knew. Or felt. Or maybe just loved me enough not to leave me unprotected. I put the envelope back, carefully, as if it was not just paper but Henry's heart, the heart he left me so I wouldn't get lost in this new, cold world. I wiped my eyes with my sleeve. And didn't cry. The tears were there, but not from weakness. They were because I felt. I have the answer. I didn't yet know how exactly I would use it. I didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to wave papers around. Number. I wanted the moment I took out that envelope to be precise, powerful, inevitable. I wanted that when it happened. I wouldn't need to say a word. Let Henry say it all. Let the signature at the bottom speak. Let silence be the loudest answer. I carefully placed the will in my purse, closed it, set it beside the bed, and whispered in the dark, "Let them think I'm nobody for now, but the game is just beginning." That day, I stayed home alone. Amanda was at work, Doug too, and the kids were at school. Finally, the house was quiet. I decided to walk through the living room, tidy up, and do some laundry. I didn't want to be a burden. I always tried to be less. And then I noticed something was wrong. Above the fireplace used to hang a large photo. Henry and me, Doug, little Luke sitting on Henry's lap, and Sarah holding his finger. It was Thanksgiving, 2014. We were renting a house on Cape Cod, eating too much turkey, and Henry joked all evening about how he'd overeaten like a senator. And now, the photo was gone. I stepped closer. In its place was a new frame. Same walls, same niche. But now just three. Amanda, Doug, and the kids. All dressed in beige, standing by the ponds at Roger Williams Park. Elegant. Perfect. Without me. Without Henry. At first, I thought maybe it was taken down to dust. Maybe the glass had cracked. But when I peeked around the corner into the hallway by the closet, I saw the old frame lying face down on a shelf. Like someone didn't want anyone to even accidentally see it. I stood there, my hand pressed against the cold wall. I was gripped by a strange feeling as if I were disappearing. Not removed, erased. That evening, I tried to look normal. Blue striped dress, light earrings, hair pinned up. Henry always said I looked especially Newport style that way. On the table, roasted chicken, broccoli, and some trendy quinoa rice. Everything neatly laid out, white plates on linen napkins. I sat down, smiled. How was everyone's day? Amanda didn't answer. Doug nodded without looking up. Sarah buried herself in her phone. And Luke, my grandson, the boy who used to ask me to read Goodnight Moon twice every night, suddenly said, "Can you pass the water, Grace?" I froze. Grace. Not Grandma. Not Grammy. Just Grace. Like a stranger. I handed him the pitcher, smiled, though everything inside ached, not because of the words, but because someone had taught him to say that. Someone decided I was no longer a grandmother. At that moment, Amanda looked up, her gaze direct, cold, emotionless. She said with that icy politeness, like a waiter saying, "Enjoy your meal," after forgetting your order for 40 minutes. "We're trying to create a new atmosphere, light, clean, without the burden of the past." The burden of the past. Now, that's me a burden? I set down my fork, went to the kitchen for water. Just to breathe. There, by the sink, I finally allowed myself to feel. Not tears, number. Shame, deep and sticky. Shame for being unnecessary. Shame for being extra in a life I helped build. But then I remembered the will, the envelope, Henry's signature. And for the first time in weeks of humiliation, hints, and empty stares, I thought, they really don't know who I am. But soon they will. It was an ordinary morning. The smell of coffee, toast, and hypocrisy filled the air. I walked into the kitchen at 7:30 as usual. Amanda was already sitting at the table, wearing a perfectly pressed ivory blouse, an iPad in front of her and a cup in one hand. Doug was standing by the stove, pretending to stir something in a pan. He did that when he didn't know where to put himself. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself some coffee. "Grace," Amanda began. Her voice was soft. Too soft. The kind of soft you use when talking to a dog you're trying to coax into its carrier before a vet visit. "Doug and I wanted to discuss something with you." I sat down at the table and put down my mug. "Of course, I'm listening." She leaned forward slightly, placing her palms on the countertop. "We thought maybe it would be easier for you to move to Sunset Hollow. It's nearby, cozy, and, well, they have excellent care there. My friend's mom loves it. They even have a pool. It would be better for everyone." Better for everyone. How she loves these polished phrases. Not "we want you to leave," but better for everyone. I turned to Doug. He was silent, staring into his plate. I knew that look, the look he had as a boy whenever he broke something a vase, or a promise and didn't want to see how much it hurt me. Only now he was no longer a boy. He was a grown man. A husband, a father, and a coward. I placed my hands on my knees, felt my fingers tremble, but my voice was steady, calm. "So, you've already chosen the place?" Amanda nodded. "We just thought it would be easier for you. Someone to serve you, cook for you, do your laundry, you'd have your own room, and no one would bother you." How generous. "So no one will bother me." As if I were a stone in someone's shoe. As if I hadn't made chicken soup for Doug when he had a cold in 5th grade. As if I hadn't sat on the floor next to Amanda's chair in the delivery room when she was in heavy labor and crying because she was scared to become a mother. As if none of that mattered anymore. I slowly opened my bag, which was sitting on the chair next to me, took out an envelope, beige, thick, with Henry's handwriting on the front. I placed it on the table between us. Amanda frowned. "And what's this?" I looked at her calmly, my voice still quiet. "Since we're talking about comfort, I have something I'd like to clarify. For the record." I opened the envelope, took out the will, unfolded it, without looking down just into her eyes. "Henry left me this document. It's signed, notarized, and includes several clauses you've probably forgotten about." Amanda tensed. "A will?" I nodded. "Yes. For example, the one stating that this house isn't just Doug's and yours. It belongs to me 51%, according to the trust Henry set up in 2017 in case of possible changes in the family atmosphere." His words. Doug finally looked up. "What?" I turned to him. "Remember how Dad always said, 'I want you to be a man, but not at others' expense'? He knew the day would come when one of us would have to protect ourselves, and he gave me that chance." I stood up, rolled the will back up, put it back in the envelope, then into my bag. "So Amanda, you didn't just offer me to leave, you offered me to leave my own home. And you did it over breakfast, like you were asking if I wanted a different sauce for my eggs Benedict." Silence, only the ticking of the clock. "I'm not moving anywhere, not today, not tomorrow, not to Sunset Hollow, nor any other nice place with a pool. I will stay here calmly, with dignity, as the lady of the house, whom I, it turns out, officially am." Amanda sat there as if she'd swallowed a prickly lump. Doug looked like he was about to be sick. But me? For the first time in a long time, I felt not pain, not bitterness, but strength. Quiet, unshakable strength. The kind Henry always wanted me to have. And you know what was the best part? I never raised my voice once. That same evening, the sun was setting behind the hills, and the dining room windows reflected a soft amber glow. I deliberately put the kettle on, taking my time, letting the sound of the boiling water build like a quiet pressure in the background. Amanda sat at the dining table, the will spread out before her, arranged neatly like surgical instruments before an operation. Doug was beside her. His face looked different. as if he suddenly saw his mother as someone to reckon with, not just someone to take care of. I stepped closer, placed fresh copies on the table, the will, the power of attorney, the house deed, and a bank statement. Everything was set up through a trust. Everything legal, everything in writing, everything from Henry. Here, I pointed at the notary's signature. It states that ownership of the property, including the house, the land, and the main Bank of America account, passes to me for the rest of my life. Or, as the document says, until voluntary relinquishment or loss of capacity. Amanda, who just yesterday looked so composed and polished, now seemed as if someone had squeezed her face into a fist. She slowly lifted her eyes. So, you knew everything? I tilted my head. Number, I didn't know everything, just suspected, Henry said. You've earned your peace, even if we're gone, and paper is stronger than words. I thought it was just a gesture. But he, as always, planned ahead. Doug looked at me silently. That look I will never forget. There was no hatred. There was confusion. Boyish, painful confusion. For the first time, he understood that his mother was not just a background figure in the family portrait, but a person who could surprise. I slowly folded the documents and put them back in the envelope. The silence was thick. Looks like, I said calmly, looking Amanda straight in the eye, I'm not exactly a nobody, right? Amanda lowered her gaze. Even she realized her game was lost. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. Put the kettle on. Picked my favorite mug, the one with the Rhode Island lighthouse, the very one Henry and I bought at the fair. Spoonful of tea leaves. Pour boiling water. My hands did not tremble. Then I simply stood by the window and watched the garden bathed in evening light. Where they saw old age, Henry saw value. Where they counted on oblivion, he put his signature. And that signature turned out to be louder than all their toasts and plans combined. The house didn't grow quieter. It grew cautious. Now they tiptoe around. If before I feared being the odd one out, now I am like gravity in this family. Invisible, but everything revolves around me. Grace, do you mind if we put the Christmas tree here by the window? Amanda asks, her smile stretched tight. Of course, I answer without looking up from my newspaper. Or, if you prefer, somewhere else, she quickly adds. I nod. Or sometimes just look over my glasses. Often I say nothing, and the silence after my silence sounds louder than any answer. Doug has become distracted. He asks if I need help, saying it like an apology, though I'm not sure for what. Only one person acts naturally, Tommy, my 7-year-old grandson. He comes to me in the garden, wraps his arms around my waist, and says, Grandma, can I watch cartoons in your room? It's quiet there. I smile. Of course, sweetheart. And we go together. My room is now sacred ground. No arguments there. No suggestions on how things should be. Tommy brings me drawings. One I hung above my desk. Me and him sitting on the porch, next to a tree with a bird's nest. In childish handwriting, it says, I love you, Grandma Grace. It was the first time in a long while someone wrote my name with love and not awkwardness. The rest of the house? It's winter. Not outside, inside. Now Amanda asks if she can use the washing machine, though before she decided when and how everything should happen. Doug doesn't turn the television on loud anymore. He waits until I leave the room. But the most telling thing is dinners. We thought we'd order Chinese food, Amanda says, nearly running into the kitchen. Are you in the mood for lo mein? Number, I cooked a roast. That's it. They sit down silently. They eat. Because I am the lady of the house. Because everything has changed. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm simply living. But their unease is like a gentle breeze, something they fear, because now I can take a step in any direction and they don't know what will happen. Sometimes I hear them argue at night, thinking I'm asleep. She knows everything. What if she rewrites the will? We need to be gentler. Number. You needed to be human when I was weak. Now I am calm. And you can feel it. It was Thursday morning. Amanda said she would take Tommy to school herself. Doug had left for a meeting, and I pulled out Henry's old cashmere coat from the closet, warmth and status rolled into one sleeve. I called a cab because today I wanted to do everything my own way. Mr. Lawrence's office looked as it always did, strict and quiet. Old wood, dark-toned walls, and a desk with a cup that always had coffee, but no coffee in it, just habit. He hadn't touched it in 20 years. "Mrs. Hanson," he said, standing up, "please have a seat." We had worked together since Henry first opened his boat repair workshop. He knew us like the back of his hand. But this time, I was not someone's wife. I was myself. "I want to change the will," I said. "No preliminaries. No. What will they say? Just legally." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "In whose favor?" "Tommy. Only him. I want to set up an educational trust. Let him use it when he goes to college, or if he doesn't, for his first business. I want him to have a foundation. So he knows his grandmother saw in him not just a child, but a man, a future." "And Doug?" "Amanda?" I exhaled slowly, placed my bag on my lap, and carefully pulled out a handkerchief. "Nothing. Not a cent. If they decide to visit me, let it be not for numbers but for me. But I hold no grudge. I just remember." He nodded and began filling out the papers. "Would you like to notify them?" I smiled. "Number, let them try. Let them bake pies. Ask how I'm feeling. Pretend to care. I want to see how much they truly care without promises and contracts." He smirked. "Your foresight is a true art, Mrs. Hanson?" "Not foresight," I replied. "It's intuition. Female intuition. And a little revenge, but very polite." When I got home, Amanda asked if I'd been to the pharmacy. "Yes," I answered, taking off my coat. "I was taking care of my health." She nodded, unaware how close she was to the truth. Sometimes, to change everything, you don't need to shout. You just need to sign the papers in the right day and leave behind a silence that echoes. Spring in Savannah arrives slowly. The warm air fills the morning with the scent of magnolias and damp earth. This year, I decided that my garden would be different. When Henry was alive, the garden was his domain. He trimmed the bushes, pruned the roses, swearing on everything that no one knew how to water hydrangeas properly but him. And I just wiped his brow and made lemonade. But now the garden is mine. I pulled out the old bushes those Amanda planted to make the house look presentable. Those sterile, dull plants that bloomed uniformly and smelled like nothing. In their place, I planted jasmine, lavender, and wild sage. Flowers with scent, with character, those that bloom when they want not by some schedule. As I dug the earth, I remembered Amanda saying, "A garden is for guests, not for old women with feelings." Well, there's no place for guests in this garden anymore. Only for those who come with soul. On the porch, in her usual Friday spot, sat May. A widow. We buried our husbands together, discussed blood pressure meds, and suddenly realized we were still alive, maybe even more than before. "I noticed you threw out her roses," May said, sipping sweet tea. I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. No one smelled them. They were just for show. "So what now?" I pointed to the flower bed, where, for the first time in years, bindweed had taken root, wild, stubborn, just like me. "Now, what blooms here blooms because it wants to, not because it should." May laughed. They never understood what they lost the most valuable thing: respect. I looked at my hands covered in soil, in old garden gloves. The hands of a woman who lost her husband. Almost lost her home. Her son emotionally, for sure. But not herself. "And me, May," I said, "I'm just beginning to live." We were silent. The wind stirred the branches. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. Because I knew, now my garden and my life bloom for me. The night in Savannah was quiet, as if listening to my thoughts. Before going to bed, I carefully slipped an envelope under my grandson Jake's pillow. He doesn't yet understand the whole family story, but I know that one day this letter will be like a beacon for him in the dark. I wrote it simply, without drama or complaints. If you ever feel that the truth isn't on the side of the majority, remember Grandma. I left with dignity. And I stayed true to myself. And that is what matters most. This letter is my way of saying, I forgive and I am free. Morning came gently, sunlight streaming through the kitchen curtains. The family was already gathered. Amanda, Doug, Jake, and even their new neighbors, just a regular Sunday morning. I walked silently past them like a shadow no one noticed. But this time not with pain, but with confidence. Everyone froze when they saw me heading toward the table. Amanda even paled slightly. Silence hung in the air, and then Doug stood up. He had always been the one to keep things in order. "Mom, please sit down," he said with unexpected warmth. Everyone else followed his lead. I sat at the head of the table where Henry used to sit. The family breakfast began. And in that moment, I realized I was back. But not to fight. To live. Freely, with love, with respect for myself. Because this is how a woman who hasn't lost herself should live, with dignity and honor. And even if the whole world around me has changed, grace in my heart remains the same.